Next up, we have Jim Moulthrop. Currently, he is Executive Director of FP2 Incorporated, Foundation for Pavement Preservation, a nonprofit trade association representing the pavement preservation industry.
Some discussion early on about some of the challenges and opportunities. I added the word opportunities from the original subject area regarding preservation treatments and quality assurance. For DOT folks sitting here, you can probably snooze a little bit because you've already been through this a number of times and know what QA is and all those things. Some of the industry folks are familiar with it, but maybe you aren't. So these are the things I'm going to talk about. Look at the components of a QA program. It's published by TRB and AASHTO and FHWA, et cetera. There's nothing new here. Look at some of the flexible pavement treatments. That's what I'm going to be dealing with in terms of QA. I'm not leaving out the fact that the QA is important for the PCC area. It certainly is. Most of my experience has been in the flexible area, so that's why I chose it. Some of the challenges: what, where, and how to sample, and how to test. What tests are we going to run? Where are they going to be done? How about some examples? And I'll look at specifically with an example of emulsion chip seals. I didn't go into hot applied chip seals or rubber modified binders or those types of things with chip seals, but specifically with emulsion chip seals. Look at some examples and then talk about maybe what some opportunities are out there and what's current practice as I see it. What are we looking at in terms of the Min-Road NCAT study that's been done since 2012 in terms of QA? And then some acknowledgements, even though I've used some information in my presentation from some other folks, and I want to acknowledge that I did that. And then some closing remarks. So let's get into it. QA, you've seen us, if you're a DOT person, deal at all with materials and quality and so forth. You've seen this three-legged stool where we have quality control or process control on the part of the contractor on the left, acceptance sampling and testing in the middle, and then independent assurance on the right. If we look at quality assurance, that's defined by TRB and is transportation circular. You can read that, all those planned activities. Or simply stated, maybe it's making sure the quality of a product is what it should be. It's kind of what the QA emphasis is. Process control or quality control. Neil had already talked about previously. It's performed by the contractor, pretty simple. Must control the production process. Sometimes we're talking about an actual production, and sometimes we're talking about an actual finished product. But written quality control plan, what's that contractor going to do, and some of the things that Neil outlined there: monitor production and placement, make adjustments when they need to be made. Who's in charge of it? What's the operating procedures? How are we going to proceed if we see there's a problem? When everything's working fine, there's not usually anything to worry about, but it's when a problem occurs or something doesn't work like it's supposed to, that's when the bells go off and we need to do something about it. The question is, who's going to do that, and how does that work within the organization? And then a sampling and testing program. I'm part of the contractor. What's he going to sample? What's he going to test? How's he going to report it, et cetera? That's usually all included in process control or a quality control plan. From acceptance sampling and testing, then it's performed by the owner or the owner's representative. In some cases, it may be a consulting engineering firm that's been hired by the owner. I put inspection in there in capital letters in yellow because sometimes in the pavement preservation treatment arena, we don't really think and spend enough time talking about how important inspection is. Maybe sometimes it's not even done. Maybe if it's department force work where actual employees in the department itself are actually doing it, whether it's a chip seal or cold in place recycling or whatever the case might be, inspection may not even be first or second thought in what's done. How important it is from the inspection, and I'll cover that a little bit as I go along here. Obviously monitor the process control testing that's going on by the contractor. There's nothing, that's part and parcel of doing it. And then acceptance sampling and testing. Is it going to be by the owner? And as most of you in the agencies know, You know, with rule changes, I don't remember, 10 or 15 years ago, it allowed the use of contractor data for acceptance purposes, provided certain caveats are met within the federal guidelines. So who's going to do the acceptance sampling and testing, whether it be the owner or whether it be the contractor? Independent assurance, obviously a third-party assessment, usually a whole different group within an organization. It's part and parcel of the agency, but different. It's not in the acceptance process, and the results are not to be used for acceptance, but it's an overview of, is the process, is the system working like it's supposed to? What are the things that need to happen in order to have that happen? It needs to be independent. So if we look at it from an independent point of view, we have an independent check on QC or process control and the acceptance sampling and testing and the acceptance process. Is it working like it's supposed to? So as I say, DOT folks deal with this a lot. You know more about it, a lot more about it, especially if you're working in materials. So there's nothing new there for you. Maybe some of the contractors here or suppliers may not see all those things all the time. Preservation treatments, you see a list here, a laundry list of both flexible and rigid treatments. You may see some things on here that they're not what you do. That's not to be totally comprehensive, but it covers most things. Interestingly enough, you see chip seals versus seal coat. Some agencies in the U.S. don't call it a chip seal, they call it a seal coat. So it's the same thing, same idea. So what are the challenges in dealing with this in terms of quality assurance? What and where how to sample and test? In my opinion, again, quality control during the process done by the contractor, probably not a big challenge. He knows his product, knows he better, knows his product or process, has a pretty good handle on how things are working because he's doing some routine sampling and testing, whether it's required by the specifications, and usually it is. So many lot sizes or so many tons, so many whatever the quantities might be, sampling them, reporting the data, and controlling the process because of that. And if they're using quality control charts, they might be able to see when the production is tending out of control, and they start to look at what are the probable causes of it and bring it back within some limits of the specification. Acceptance testing may be a little larger challenge on the part of, I'm talking about flexible pavement materials now, and I'll get into an example with the chip seal from what I mean by a larger challenge. Independent assurance, again, I don't think it's as big a challenge as acceptance testing or the process control or quality control, but nonetheless, these issues need to be outlined and understood. So do we sample from production, the production unit, or the pavement surface? And if we decide we're going to sample from the pavement surface, how do we do it? Is there a best way to do it? And let's say we do get a sample from the pavement surface, what do we do with it after we get it? How do we test it? Finished product or components? Typically, with a chip seal, we're looking at components, measuring the aggregate, and whether it's gradation or sand equivalent or crush count or whatever the number of things that one could run, or whether it's the emulsion, whether it's stability, and on and on and on that you can run, yeah, those things can be done. But do you do it on the finished product? How do you do that? So let's take a look here as an example from a quality control example, again, by the contractor. It's for chip seal. You'll see here ETF, Emulsion Task Force, as Judy explained earlier, that it's part of the AASHTO TSP2 program. NCHRP, I believe most everybody knows what that is, National Cooperative Highway Research Program. There was a recent project, 1437, it's available now. The subject of that project was the development of guidelines, construction guidelines for chip seals, microsurfacing, and fog seal. It's available online now if you want it. As near as I understand it, it will be balloted by AASHTO in the current ballot process or pretty soon. That's where that came from. SPS 11 study was a recently completed study by Federal Highway that supported it. which was looking at pavement preservation activities in both the flexible pavement SPS 11 and concrete side, which is SPS 12. What was published, however, was guidelines in terms of as it relates to the flexible pavement stuff. The emulsion, numerous requirements. You can meet a number of different tests or different types of emulsions that are out there, whether they be cationic, anionic, polymer modified, on and on and on, or pretty typical in a lot of cases, it's accepted by certification. You get some kind of a certificate from the supplier that says this product in this tank load meets the requirements of AASHTO or ASTM or PennDOT or DelDOT or whatever the case might be. However, there doesn't appear to be, at least that I could find, anything dealing with the application rate of emulsion except ASTM 2995. So I didn't see any AASHTO equivalent for that. But if we're going to estimate the amount of application of residue, if you will, the emulsion, we need to do something about it. And when it comes to aggregate, again, there's numerous requirements. It's in MP27 of AASHTO. Determining the transverse spread rate of aggregate, again, gets back to ASTM. Those are some of the things that can be done during the quality control aspects of things. In other words, measure the properties of the emulsion and the aggregate. Then when it comes to the application rates and how do you measure those? Well, there are procedures where if you follow the ASTM process, you put down pads or some other technique on the pavement surface, you shoot it with emulsion or you apply the aggregate, you pick up the pads, you measure them, and you do some calculations to get the application rates. Or you use the equipment that's currently being available, some of the computerized equipment that will give you some of that knowledge as well. So in the seal coat end of things, in addition to understanding the emulsion and the aggregates, let's say, how about the workmanship? How about the things that are related to placement? And you see them all here. Again, coming out of the emulsion task force who put together a quality assurance plan for chip seals about a year ago that is currently being considered by a number of groups, including AASHTO. Inspection, getting back to that term, how about a pre-construction meeting? What do we talk about? Obviously, a lot of other things that are very important for the performance of that application you see there. Sampling and testing at the discretion of the agency, those things need to be sorted out. And we'll see here that it's important that in the specification area at least, that those things be identified. Inspectors' responsibilities. Know the contract requirements. That's pretty simple. Responsibilities. And you'll see some other things noted here. Probably the two most important ones are on the bottom. Documentation and communication. How important those things are to get the quality project that we all want to have. From an independent assurance example, the responsibility of the agency, again, verification of both of those previous things, whether it's process control or acceptance sampling, and if data is not used for acceptance, that's understood. So we're really, the whole idea behind the IA is to evaluate the quality and the qualifications of the sampling and testing personnel. I mentioned a lot of things. What do we measure? How do we measure? Where do we sample? Those types of things. So let's look at current practice again in seal coats. NCHRP 1082 was a project that recently completed that dealt with performance-related specs for preservation treatments. And during that study, they looked at 11 states who identified what they currently do right now for chip seals. They looked at the application rate of emulsion. They look at the application rate of aggregate. Some of them measure gradation. Not all of them do. Some note the number of roller passes. So that's the kind of information that, according to the study, and 11 states were involved all across the country, those are the things that they're actually measuring. Specifically how they're measuring the application rates of the emulsion and aggregate, if they're measuring it by looking at stockpile depletion, or they're looking at what's in the emulsion tank, sticking the tank in those, or whether they're actually measuring it in place with pads on the surface of the pavement, running some tests to determine that. That's not clear in the report on exactly how they're doing that. So what are the opportunities then? If we say that, well, we have an issue here, maybe, not making a mountain out of a molehill, but is it important for us to understand what we've actually placed on the pavement when we build a chip seal? And some of you might say, nah, that's not very important. Some of you would say, yeah, I want to know. Is it important for me to know that? Because when it comes time, at some point in time, to assess performance, it would be nice to know that if we were trying to shoot 32, whatever gallons per square yard, and we only did 26, or whatever the case might be, those might be very important numbers to know. Some of the things that were identified, FHWA report I mentioned about SPS 11, were embedment depth is something else we could measure. It isn't clear to me in that report exactly how you do that. Some of that's estimated now with procedures, but whether there's a actual test method, I'm not positive. The sweep test has been around maybe 10 years or so. It's an ASTM test method where you actually take the specimen and sweep the top of it and measure the loss of aggregate. Or a VILA test, which is a test from France, developed a number of years ago. But Caltrans is apparently using that test method or about to adopt it. During the NCAT Minroad study, they've actually went out and did the things that I've been talking about. Put pads on the pavement surface, went out and actually had a pickup truck with the weights in the back of it and ovens and so forth, actually measuring by weight what was there and then drying all the emulsions and on and on and on, doing the process to say, this is what we actually placed. They have a lot of data. They haven't really reported a lot on it yet, but it's going to be interesting to see what their recommendations would be in terms of test methods as well as procedures to go. But it's something from an opportunity point of view that we can look forward to. So certainly from the NRoad study, MinRoad, NCAT study, we see that. QA is not new, commonly accepted practices. Where it hasn't been used, it should be institutionalized, in my opinion. So with that, here's some acknowledgements. Maybe the last one, that inspection piece. Presentation was made at the Western Regional Association of Pavement Preservation workshop recently. The other things that are there too. So thanks for not asking any questions so we can be moving on with the program.
The preceding was produced by the National Center for Pavement Preservation. More information can be found on the web at pavementpreservation.org. Additional support provided by Michigan State University.